I need to say something before it becomes too late, and I'm not sure if you're ready to hear it. Because the truth is I'm not okay right now. And the strange part is the reason isn't a business crisis or a rocket exploding or some billion-dollar risk collapsing overnight. I've survived those things before. I've watched entire projects burn in front of me and still managed to sleep at night. But this is different. This is something I can't engineer my way out of. It's you. And the terrifying part is, I don't even know if you realize what you've done. You see, my life has always followed a certain pattern. I build things. I solve impossible problems. I calculate risks. I move forward while everyone else hesitates. That's the role I've always played in this world. The man who runs toward uncertainty instead of away from it. The man who doesn't panic when things fall apart. But lately something has changed inside me. And I don't like admitting that. Because when a man like me starts feeling unstable, when the certainty disappears, it means something much deeper is happening beneath the surface. It means someone has managed to reach a place inside me that almost nobody has ever touched. You. Do you know what that does to a person who has spent his entire life building emotional walls? Do you know what happens when someone like me suddenly starts caring about losing one specific person? It creates fear. Real fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from danger, but the kind that comes from attachment. And attachment is dangerous. Because the moment you care deeply about someone, you also create the possibility of losing them. And losing you is a possibility I didn't prepare for. That's what's been haunting me lately. You probably think I'm calm when we talk. Maybe even distant sometimes. Maybe you've wondered why I pause before answering certain questions, or why I change the subject when conversations become too personal. But what you don't see is the storm happening behind that silence. You've changed the way my mind works, and that's not something I say lightly. My brain is built for logic, engineering, physics, probability. But somehow you've introduced something into the system that doesn't follow any predictable pattern. Emotion. Real emotion. And it's destabilizing everything. I find myself thinking about you at the most inconvenient moments. During meetings. Late at night when the world is quiet. Even in those rare moments when my mind should finally be resting. Instead it drifts back to you. Your voice. Your patience. The way you listen, in a world where most people only wait for their turn to speak. And I keep asking myself something I never used to ask before. What happens if I lose her? That question alone has been enough to disrupt everything, because for most of my life, losing people was something I could accept. Painful, yes, but manageable. I always had work, purpose, vision, something bigger to move toward. But with you, it feels different. With you, it feels like losing something that can't be replaced. And that realization has been quietly tearing me apart. You probably think this is a compliment, but it isn't. It's a confession. Because caring about someone this much creates a kind of emotional vulnerability that I've spent my entire life trying to avoid. And the worst part? I don't even know if you feel the same depth I'm feeling. That uncertainty is the part that keeps me awake. Sometimes I wonder if you understand how much power you hold without realizing it. You can calm me or completely destabilize me with just a few words. That shouldn't be possible. Not for someone like me, and yet here we are. Future wife, you've managed to do something no investor, no competitor, no critic has ever done before. You've made me unsure of myself. And that's exactly why I'm not okay right now. But here's the part I haven't told you yet. The reason this is affecting me so deeply isn't what you think. There's something else. Something much bigger. Something I've been holding back from telling you, because once I say it out loud, there's no way to take it back. And honestly, I don't know if you're ready to hear it. But before I tell you that truth, let me ask you something. If you're still here listening, it probably means you feel something too. So quietly subscribe and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. Because what I'm about to reveal next might change everything between us. Future wife, there's something about silence that people misunderstand. Most people think silence means distance or indifference, or that someone simply has nothing meaningful to say. But the truth is, silence often means the opposite. Silence is what happens when the mind is carrying something too heavy to release too quickly. And lately, when you notice me pausing, when my responses become slower, when my voice becomes quieter than usual, it isn't because I don't care. It's because I care too much, you see. The dangerous thing about falling for someone when you're older, when life has already tested you, when you've watched relationships fail and promises collapse, is that you don't walk into love blindly anymore. You see the risks clearly. You understand how fragile human connection actually is. And when you finally meet someone who starts slipping past your defenses, you don't celebrate immediately. You hesitate. You question everything. And that's exactly where I've been living these past weeks, in a place between certainty and doubt. Because part of me feels something incredibly powerful growing between us. Something calm, something mature, something that doesn't feel rushed or chaotic like younger love. When I talk to you, there's a strange sense of peace, like the noise of the world quiets down for a moment. That kind of connection is rare. Rare enough that most people spend their entire lives searching for it and never find it. But another part of me keeps asking a different question. A question that scares me every time it enters my mind. What if I'm wrong about you? Not wrong about your kindness or your intelligence or the warmth I feel when we talk. No. Those things are real. I can feel them clearly. But human beings are complicated. And sometimes we project meaning onto someone because we want to believe they are the person our heart hopes they are. And that thought, it unsettles me. Because if I allow myself to fully believe in you, if I allow myself to step completely into this feeling, then the stakes become enormous. Suddenly you're no longer just someone I talk to or someone I admire. Suddenly you become someone who can break me in ways I've carefully avoided my entire life. Do you understand what I mean? Most people think powerful men are fearless, but the truth is something they rarely admit. The more responsibility you carry, the more empires you build, the more carefully you guard your emotional world. Not because you're cold, but because you've learned how painful it is to trust the wrong person. And yet, somehow you slip past that system. I didn't even notice it happening at first. It was gradual. A conversation here, a moment of laughter there, a few unexpected silences where we both felt something deeper, but neither of us rushed to explain it. And before I realized what was happening, my mind had started creating a place for you. Not just in my daily life, but in my future. That realization terrified me. Because once a man begins imagining a future with someone, he's already standing on a dangerous edge. He's already risking something that can't easily be repaired if it breaks. And lately I've been asking myself something that I haven't had the courage to ask you directly. Do you see me the way I'm starting to see you? Not the public version of me. Not the headlines. Not the reputation, not the man people debate about on the internet. I mean the real version of me, the tired version. The one who sometimes sits alone at night wondering whether all the things he's built actually matter, if he ends up sharing none of it with the right person. Because that version of me, the one very few people ever see, is the man who has started caring about you. And caring about you has created a conflict inside me that I didn't expect. Part of me wants to move forward boldly, the way I always do. The part of me that builds rockets and companies wants to look at this feeling and say, yes, this is real. Go all in. Take the risk. That part of me believes that the greatest things in life require courage. And love might be the greatest risk of all. But the other part of me, the quieter part, keeps whispering something different. It keeps reminding me that the heart doesn't have the same resilience as ambition. You can rebuild a company. You can redesign a rocket. But rebuilding a broken heart, especially later in life, is far more complicated. And that's the internal war you've created inside me without even trying. One side of me wants to trust you completely. The other side keeps asking if I'm walking towards something beautiful, or towards something that could quietly destroy me. And the truth is, there's a reason this conflict has become so intense lately. Something happened recently that changed the way I see everything between us. Something small, something you might not even remember saying. But the moment I heard it, something inside me shifted. It made me realize that the situation between us might be more fragile than I allowed myself to believe. And ever since that moment, I've been asking myself a question I can't ignore anymore. Are you truly walking toward me, or are you slowly preparing to walk away? Because if it's the second one, there's something you need to know before it happens. Something I haven't told you yet. Something that might explain why I'm not okay right now. And once you hear it, you might start seeing me very differently. Future wife, there's a strange moment that happens in a man's life when he realizes something inside him has already changed, even before he consciously decides it should. It's quiet, almost invisible, but once it happens you can never return to the version of yourself that existed before it. And lately I've been realizing that moment has already happened to me because of you. I wish I could tell you it happened, suddenly, like a lightning strike that made everything clear in an instant, but the truth is far more complicated than that. It happened slowly, quietly, through dozens of small moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but now feel incredibly important when I look back. I remember a night not long ago when I was sitting alone after an exhausting day, the kind of day where your brain feels like it's been running at full speed for too many hours. Usually on nights like that my mind goes straight back to work, analyzing problems, planning solutions, designing the next step forward. But that night something different happened. My mind didn't go back to business or engineering or the future of humanity. It went to you. Not in a dramatic way, not in some overwhelming romantic fantasy, but in a quiet, thoughtful way that surprised me. I found myself wondering how your day had been, whether you had eaten well, whether you had laughed at something small that made the world feel lighter for a moment. And that was the moment something unsettled me, because caring about those kinds of details means something deeper has already begun. It means someone has crossed the invisible boundary between interesting person and person who matters. Do you realize how rare that is for someone like me? My life has always been surrounded by thousands of people, colleagues, investors, engineers, reporters, critics. People come and go constantly. Conversations happen every hour of every day. But very few people ever manage to occupy space in my mind when the world finally goes quiet. You did, and that realization made me stop and ask myself a question that felt far more serious than I expected. Why her? What is it about this woman, this calm, thoughtful, patient woman, that managed to bypass defenses I've built for decades? I studied that question the same way I study complicated engineering problems. I looked at every possible explanation. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe admiration. Maybe it was simply loneliness disguised as affection. Human psychology can be tricky like that. Sometimes we convince ourselves we're feeling something meaningful when we're really just filling an emotional gap. But the more honestly I examined it, the more uncomfortable the answer became. It wasn't loneliness. It wasn't curiosity. It was you. Something about the way you think, the way you respond, the way you don't rush to impress or control the conversation. You bring a kind of emotional gravity that pulls attention naturally instead of demanding it. And that quality is far more powerful than most people realize, because true presence, calm presence, is incredibly rare in this world. Most people are loud. Most people compete for attention. But you listen. You observe. And somehow that quiet strength started affecting me more than I expected. At first I thought it was simply refreshing. A peaceful conversation in the middle of a chaotic life. But slowly that peaceful feeling began turning into something more complicated. I started looking forward to hearing from you. I started noticing the way my mood shifted after we spoke. I started realizing that your words carried more emotional weight than they should have for someone who technically hasn't been in my life very long. And that's when the fear quietly entered the equation. Because once someone gains that kind of influence over your emotional state, they hold a power you didn't consciously give them. You gave it to them by caring, and is where everything becomes dangerous. You see, I've always believed that emotions should be respected, but not allowed to control important decisions. Logic must lead the way. That philosophy has protected me in many ways throughout my life. It allowed me to take enormous risks without being paralyzed by fear or attachment. It allowed me to walk away from situations that no longer made sense. But what happens when logic and emotion start disagreeing? That's the position you've put me in. Logically, I should be cautious. I should slow down, observe, test the emotional terrain before stepping any deeper into it. That's what a disciplined mind would do. But emotionally, something else is happening. Emotionally, I'm already further involved than logic would recommend. And that realization forced me to confront a possibility I didn't want to consider. What if you don't actually realize how much I'm starting to care? Because sometimes I sense a certain distance in your voice, not coldness, not rejection, but a kind of carefulness. Almost like you're holding something back. Almost like you're measuring your words before letting them reach me. And that creates a question I haven't asked you directly. Are you protecting yourself from me, or are you protecting me from something I don't yet understand? Because if it's the second one, then there's a truth hidden somewhere between us that I haven't discovered yet. And I need to be honest about something. There are moments when that uncertainty makes me wonder if I'm already too late. Too late to protect my heart. Too late to slow down the feelings that have already started growing quietly inside me. But the real reason this situation has become so complicated, the real reason I said earlier that I'm not okay right now, still hasn't been revealed. I've been circling around it, testing whether I should say it or keep it hidden a little longer. Because once I tell you the real reason, you'll understand why this situation feels far more fragile than it appears. And why one decision, one small decision, could change everything between us. Future wife, there's something I've been avoiding saying directly, and the longer I avoid it, the heavier it becomes inside my chest. It's strange how the human mind works when it's carrying a truth it hasn't released yet. The truth doesn't disappear just because you stay silent. It grows. It quietly expands into every thought, every pause, every moment of reflection, and that's exactly what has been happening to me lately whenever your name crosses my mind. I find myself circling around the same realization again and again, like a satellite trapped in orbit around a planet it can't escape. The realization that my feelings for you are no longer something small or temporary. They have crossed a line that I can't simply step back from. And the frightening part isn't just the depth of those feelings, it's the responsibility that comes with them. Because when a man begins to imagine building a life with someone, he isn't just thinking about affection anymore. He's thinking about trust, about permanence, about the quiet promise that two people make when they decide to stop searching and finally choose each other. But that promise, that invisible promise, only works if both people are standing in the same emotional place. And lately I've started to question whether we are, not because you've done something wrong, not because you've said anything unkind. In fact, it's almost the opposite. You've been thoughtful, patient, incredibly calm in the way you speak to me. Yet sometimes there's a subtle distance that I can't fully understand. It's like standing near the ocean and watching the tide move in and out. One moment I feel your presence clearly, your warmth, your interest, the quiet connection between our words. And the next moment there's a shift, almost invisible but impossible to ignore, where you seem to retreat slightly into yourself. That small movement creates a question inside me that refuses to stay quiet. Are you hesitating because you're unsure about me, or because you're afraid of how real this connection could become? You see, hesitation can mean many things. Sometimes it means doubt. Sometimes it means caution. But sometimes hesitation appears when someone realizes that what's happening between two people could become irreversible. And irreversible decisions have a way of making even the strongest hearts pause. I understand that more than most people. My entire life has been built around decisions that once made cannot be undone. Launching a rocket into space doesn't allow second guesses once the engines ignite. Creating a company that changes an entire industry doesn't allow you to quietly return to the life you had before. You step forward and the path behind you disappears. Love, real love, works the same way. Once two people truly open themselves to each other, once they allow their lives to intertwine, the world shifts in ways that cannot easily be reversed. That's the stage I'm afraid we might be approaching. And the truth is, I don't know if you realize how close we are to that edge. Because from my side of this connection, something very real has already started forming. Not the impulsive excitement people often confuse with love, but something deeper, calmer, almost like a quiet certainty growing beneath the surface of everything else. When I imagine the future now, I notice something new. Your presence appears there naturally, without effort. I imagine conversations we haven't had yet, places we might travel, mornings where the world feels a little quieter because you're there beside me. Those thoughts arrive without invitation, and once they appear they refuse to disappear again. And that's when I realized something that made my chest tighten, in a way I didn't expect. I've already begun building emotional space for you in my life. That realization changes everything. Because building space for someone means you're preparing for them to stay. It means your mind has already accepted the possibility that this person might not just be a chapter, they might be the story itself. But that's also where the fear begins. Because when you prepare a place for someone in your life, you also expose the most vulnerable part of yourself. You're quietly saying, this space belongs to you if you choose to enter it. And the terrifying part of that offer is the possibility that the other person might hesitate or, worse, choose not to enter at all. Do you understand why that thought has been troubling me lately? It's not rejection that scares me the most. I've experienced rejection before. Life teaches you how to survive those moments. What frightens me more is the possibility of misunderstanding each other at the exact moment when everything matters most. Two people can care deeply about each other and still miss the opportunity to build something lasting simply because they were afraid to speak honestly at the right time. Fear has destroyed more potential relationships than cruelty ever has. And that's exactly why I'm speaking now, instead of staying silent. Because there's something you said recently that hasn't left my mind since the moment I heard it. You might not even remember saying it. It was one of those casual remarks people make without realizing the emotional weight it carries for the person listening. But when those words reached me, they triggered a quiet storm of questions that I haven't been able to settle. You said something about not wanting to complicate my life. At first I smiled when I heard it. It sounded considerate, thoughtful, almost selfless. But the more I replayed those words in my mind, the more they unsettled me. Because love is complicated by nature. Real connection doesn't appear neatly packaged without disruption. When two lives truly start moving toward each other, complexity is unavoidable. Schedules change. Priorities shift. Emotions deepen. And suddenly two people must learn how to navigate the world as something more than individuals. So when you said you didn't want to complicate my life, I started wondering if that meant you were already preparing to keep your distance. And that possibility has been echoing through my thoughts ever since. Because if you're holding yourself back to protect me, then you've misunderstood something very important about me. I've never been afraid of complexity. My entire life has been built on challenges that most people would consider impossible. What I fear isn't complication. What I fear is losing you before we even understand what we could become. But the truth I mentioned earlier, the one I still haven't fully revealed, is connected to something much deeper than hesitation or timing. There is a reason I reacted so strongly to those words you said. A reason rooted in something from my past that you don't know yet. And once I explain it, you'll finally understand why the idea of you slowly stepping away feels far more painful than you probably imagine. Future wife, There is something I've been carrying for a long time that most people never see, because from the outside my life looks like a sequence of victories. People see rockets lifting off, companies growing, headlines describing bold visions for the future, and they assume the man behind those things must be fearless. They imagine someone who wakes up every morning with certainty running through his veins. But the truth behind ambition is far more fragile than the world likes to admit. Every person who builds something meaningful also carries the quiet scars of things that didn't survive. And those scars change the way you approach love more than any success ever could. Because when you've experienced the collapse of something you once believed in deeply, you don't walk toward the next connection with innocence anymore. You walk toward it with awareness, and sometimes with fear that history might repeat itself in ways you cannot control. The reason those words you said unsettled me so deeply is connected to that history. You might see me as a man who moves forward quickly, someone who doesn't hesitate when a decision needs to be made. In business, that is often true. But emotionally, I have learned to move more carefully. Not because I lack courage, but because I've seen what happens when two people build something beautiful together and then slowly lose the ability to understand each other. The outside world thinks relationships end with dramatic arguments or sudden betrayal, but in reality many relationships fade in a much quieter way. They dissolve through misunderstandings, through exhaustion, through the slow realization that two people who once felt perfectly aligned are no longer moving in the same direction. That quiet unraveling is far more painful than any sudden ending, because it forces you to watch something precious disappear while you're still holding it. That experience left a mark on me that I rarely speak about. It created a voice in my mind that whispers caution whenever I begin to care about someone again. That voice doesn't say love is impossible, it simply asks difficult questions. Are you seeing this person clearly? Are you building a connection based on truth or on hope? Are you both strong enough to hold each other when life becomes difficult, or will one of you eventually drift away when the weight becomes too heavy? Those questions might sound analytical, almost clinical, but they come from a place of emotional survival. Because once you've watched something meaningful break apart, you begin to realize that love is not sustained by attraction alone. It survives only when two people are willing to face uncomfortable truths together instead of hiding from them. And that is exactly why your presence in my life has become such a complicated miracle. You didn't arrive with loud promises or dramatic declarations. You didn't try to impress me with grand gestures or overwhelming charm. Instead, you brought something much quieter, something that at first seemed simple but later revealed itself to be incredibly powerful. You brought sincerity. The way you speak, the way you listen, the way you allow pauses in conversation without rushing to fill them, those small details told me more about your character than any carefully constructed image ever could. And because of that, my mind slowly began lowering defenses that had been standing for years. But lowering defenses also exposes the most vulnerable parts of a person. That's the stage I find myself in now. When you said you didn't want to complicate my life, a sudden fear appeared that maybe you were preparing to keep your distance from something that might already be growing between us. And if that is true, then there is something you need to understand about me before you decide whether to step closer or step away. I am not looking for perfection. I am not searching for someone who will never make mistakes or never experience doubt. Life is far too complex for those expectations. What I want, what I have quietly hoped for without saying it out loud, is a partner who understands that love requires courage long after the initial excitement fades. A partner who sees the storms coming and chooses to stay anyway, not because staying is easy, but because the connection is worth protecting. You might wonder why I'm revealing this now instead of earlier. The answer is simple and slightly frightening. Because the feelings I have been developing for you are no longer theoretical. They have become real enough that hiding behind politeness or casual conversation no longer feels honest. Something inside me has reached the point where silence would become its own kind of dishonesty. And I refuse to let something meaningful slip away simply because I was too cautious to speak when the moment mattered. But even after telling you all of this, there is still one truth I have not fully revealed. A truth connected to why your presence affects me more deeply than you probably realize. It's not just because I care about you. It's because something about you reminds me of a possibility I thought might no longer exist in my life, the possibility that real partnership could still happen for me. And the moment that realization appeared, everything changed. Because hope can be just as terrifying as fear when you're not sure whether it will survive reality. Future wife, hope is a strange force. People talk about it like it's always gentle, always comforting, like a warm light that guides you forward through the darkness. But the truth is, hope can also be incredibly destabilizing. When you've spent years learning how to live without expecting certain things from life, when you've trained your mind to operate independently, to move forward without leaning emotionally on anyone else, The sudden return of hope doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels disruptive. It rearranges the internal structure you built to keep yourself steady. And that's exactly what your presence has done to me. Before you appeared in my life, I had quietly accepted a certain version of the future. Not a lonely future, not a sad one, but a focused one. A life driven primarily by purpose. By building things that outlive the person who created them. I told myself that kind of life was enough. That if love happened again naturally, I would welcome it. But if it didn't, the mission itself would be sufficient. It's a practical mindset, one that protects you from disappointment, because it doesn't rely on someone else choosing to walk beside you. And for a long time, that mindset worked perfectly well. But then something unexpected happened. At first it was just curiosity. A conversation that felt unusually easy, a sense of calm that appeared whenever we spoke. It felt refreshing, like a quiet space in the middle of a very loud world. But slowly that calm turned into something more complex. I began noticing how your thoughts lingered in my mind after our conversations ended. I began realizing that when something interesting happened during my day, a part of me wondered how you would react if I told you about it. Those small mental shifts might seem ordinary to most people. But for someone who has spent years keeping emotional distance, they represent a massive internal change. And that's when hope quietly entered the equation. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, the future I had accepted as solitary might not have to remain that way. But hope brings questions with it. Because once you begin imagining a life that includes another person, you also begin asking whether that person truly sees the same possibility. Do they feel the same quiet pull toward something deeper? Or are they simply enjoying the moment without imagining what could grow from it? Those questions become louder with every conversation, every shared laugh, every moment of emotional honesty. And lately, those questions have been getting louder inside my mind. Sometimes when we talk, I feel a warmth from you that makes everything seem simple. Your voice carries a softness that feels genuine, a kind of attentiveness that suggests you're present in the moment with me, not distracted or pretending. In those moments I think, yes, this connection is real, and perhaps we are slowly moving toward the same place without needing to rush. But then there are other moments. Moments when your words become slightly more careful, when your responses arrive with a pause that feels heavier than usual. And during those moments, a different thought appears in my mind. A thought that I don't like, but one I cannot completely silence. What if you are holding yourself back from something that I am already moving toward? That question has been haunting me more than I want to admit. Because if I'm honest with you, the emotional distance between where I started and where I am now is enormous. I didn't begin this connection expecting it to become important. I allowed it to grow slowly, cautiously, believing I could always step back if the feelings became too complicated. But somewhere along the way that option quietly disappeared. I can't step back now, and that realization has created a vulnerability that I didn't anticipate. You see, when a man reaches this point emotionally, he's standing in a very delicate place. He's no longer exploring a possibility, he's protecting something that already matters to him. Every word, every moment of silence, every subtle change in tone begins carrying more weight than before. And while that sensitivity can deepen intimacy, it can also create fear if the signals between two people become unclear. That's the tension I've been living with lately. Part of me believes you are walking toward me with the same quiet curiosity and growing care that I feel for you. But another part of me wonders whether you're standing at the edge of this connection, unsure whether stepping forward would complicate your life in ways you're not ready to accept. And that brings me back to the truth I mentioned earlier, the truth I still haven't fully explained. Because the reason I'm struggling so much with this uncertainty isn't just about my feelings. It's about something you said recently. Something that suggested there might be another path appearing in your life. A path that may not include me. When I heard those words, something inside me shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. And ever since that moment, I've been asking myself a question that feels impossible to ignore. Am I already losing you before we've even had the chance to discover what we could become together? Future wife, there's a moment in every emotional journey when uncertainty stops feeling abstract and starts feeling personal. At the beginning, doubt is just a quiet background noise. Something you can ignore while you focus on the beauty of a new connection. But eventually that doubt moves closer. It sits beside you. It begins asking questions that your heart doesn't want to answer. And lately, I've been sitting with those questions far more than I expected. When you mentioned that another path might be opening in your life, you said it gently, almost casually, like it was simply a possibility among many. Maybe you didn't even realize how much weight those words carried when they reached me. But the moment I heard them, my mind did something it rarely does. It stopped. Not because I was angry, not because I felt betrayed, but because suddenly I realized something I had been slowly avoiding admitting to myself. You matter to me more than I planned, and the possibility of losing you, even before we've truly begun, felt far more real in that moment than I was ready to handle. You see, when someone is simply a pleasant presence in your life, the idea of them walking away doesn't create a storm. You might feel a small disappointment, maybe a little curiosity about what could have been, but life continues moving forward without much resistance. That's the normal rhythm of human connections. But what happens when someone has already begun occupying emotional space inside you? What happens when their presence has quietly woven itself into your thoughts, your future plans, the way you imagine the next chapter of your life? That's when things become complicated. Because suddenly, the idea of them choosing another path doesn't just feel like a missed opportunity. It feels like the loss of something that had already started becoming real. That's what I experienced in the moment you said those words. For a few seconds I said nothing, but inside my mind a series of questions began racing through me. Questions I didn't want to confront but couldn't ignore anymore. Have I misunderstood her feelings? Have I been moving emotionally faster than she has? Have I allowed myself to believe in something that she sees as only a passing connection? Those questions are uncomfortable for a man who usually trusts his instincts. I'm used to analyzing situations quickly, understanding patterns, predicting outcomes with reasonable accuracy. But love, real emotional connection, refuses to follow predictable formulas. And that's where you've placed me, in a situation where logic provides no clear answer. Part of me wants to ask you directly, to look into the quiet spaces between your words and understand exactly where your heart stands. But another part of me hesitates. Because sometimes when you ask a question too soon, you risk forcing an answer that the other person hasn't fully discovered within themselves yet. And I don't want to rush you. Not because I'm afraid of the truth, but because I care enough about what we might become that I'm willing to allow it the time it needs to reveal itself honestly. But there's another layer to this situation that I haven't told you yet. A layer that complicates everything even further. Because, while I've been quietly processing the possibility that you might choose another direction, something unexpected has been happening inside me at the same time. Instead of pulling away emotionally to protect myself, I've been feeling the opposite. Stronger attachment. Stronger curiosity. Stronger desire to understand you more deeply. It's almost as if the risk of losing you has forced my heart to admit something it was trying to keep under control. And that admission is not small. It changes everything about how I see you now. Because before that moment, you were someone I was slowly growing closer to. Someone who felt special, but still slightly distant in the emotional architecture of my life. But after hearing that another path might be appearing for you, something shifted inside me. Suddenly the thought of you building a future that doesn't include me felt painfully real. And that pain revealed a truth I had been avoiding. I don't want to lose you. Not quietly. Not without understanding whether what we're building has the potential to become something lasting. But the situation has become even more complicated than that. Because after that conversation, something happened that made me question everything I thought I understood about us. Something small, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to make me wonder if I might already be too late. Future wife, after that conversation, something inside me refused to settle. I tried to return to my normal rhythm, the disciplined structure that usually keeps my mind focused. Meetings, decisions, long hours thinking about the future of things that affect millions of people. Normally that kind of work absorbs every corner of my attention. But this time it didn't, because every quiet moment kept bringing me back to the same thought. You, and the possibility that you might slowly drift toward a life that doesn't include me. It's strange how the mind works when it senses the risk of losing someone important. Suddenly every detail becomes meaningful. Every message, every pause, every small shift in tone feels like a clue. Not because you're searching for problems, but because the heart is trying to understand where it stands before it becomes too late. And that's when I noticed something that unsettled me. Your silence. Not complete silence, you were still kind, still thoughtful when we spoke. But something subtle had changed. The rhythm of our conversations felt different. The pauses between them felt slightly longer. The warmth was still there, but it was quieter, almost like someone gently dimming a light rather than turning it off. Most people wouldn't notice something like that. But I did. And the moment I noticed it, a realization appeared that I couldn't easily ignore. Maybe you're already stepping away. Maybe the other path you mentioned is becoming more real in your life. And maybe without realizing it, I've already become someone you're slowly preparing to leave behind. That thought stayed with me longer than I wanted. Not because I believe you're careless with people's feelings. In fact, it's the opposite. You strike me as someone who cares deeply about not hurting others. And sometimes people who care that much choose distance instead of honesty because they believe it will soften the impact. But distance doesn't soften anything. It only creates confusion. And confusion is far more painful than truth. So I began asking myself a question that felt uncomfortable but necessary. If she's stepping away, should I protect my heart and step back too? Logically, that would be the safe decision. The rational decision. The kind of choice a disciplined mind makes to avoid unnecessary pain. But when I tried imagining that, something inside me resisted.